Self-control, diligence, honor, kindness. If you want these characteristics in your life, then the Odyssey is a must-read.
Welcome back to the great conversation. We're so glad that you're here. You have joined us in this conversation. We have finished the Odyssey. And our last episode, we left off where Telemachus was still out trying to figure out what was happening with his father. And Odysseus was in a foreign land, finally finding some people that were going to give him a voyage home to Ithaca.
Yes.
And there has been a lot that has happened in the closing chapters of the Odyssey. And really just a lot of building blocks that we've taken away to add to our own life and how we can grow as humans. And so, like Ben said in the intro, that the Odyssey is a must-read if you want to have some of these qualities.
Yeah.
Telemachus is brought home finally by, this goddess that has put an idea into his mind that he needs to come home. And Odysseus has just been given this voyage, left on the beaches of Ithaca, and wakes up
with a whole thing of loot, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of prizes from the land that he was in previously. And he is told by Pallas Athene that he needs to go to his swineherd on his property, and he needs to be this just a wretch.
A vagabond,
an old, poor man.
Yep.
And this is how he is going to test the suitors that have been ravaging his livelihood while he's been gone.
Yeah.
A lot happens in these last chapters.
Yeah, it's crazy just to think of the approach of Odysseus to his homeland. Like when we think about who he was in the Iliad, he was this warrior. Mm-hmm. He got into the horse and kept all the men quiet, and he led the troops and he conquered Troy. And then he comes back and he's told by Athena, hey, be basically a vagabond, a homeless person, and come back home. Right. Instead of going in the powerhouse man that you are and just like laying down the law and destroying everything. Because, I mean, what we learn about these suitors is they were just kind of riled up young men. Yeah. Why couldn't this warrior gone in there and just cut them up really quick, right?
They were the best men of Ithaca, but they were still children. They didn't even go off to war because they were so young.
They would have been too young.
100%. Right, when the war started.
Yeah. So it's just crazy, like, the lessons were basically walked through. So first and foremost, he heads out to the swineherd, right? Mm-hmm. And what do we see there? What's kind of the characteristic or character trait that's transpiring there?
So I think first of all is when he comes back into his homeland, he had to take the advice of a goddess to have self-control. Yeah. Because like Ben said, he could have just jumped right in, and it might have been foolish because it was going to be him against, they don't say specifically.
It sounds like at least 10 to 15.
Yeah, if you want to count each name as you read the Odyssey, you can, but there are quite a few young men that have a lot of energy. And so he could have had this very foolish, out of control attitude of, I'm going to take back my home. And what we learn about Odysseus is that he is wise. He is very strategic.
Yes.
And he wants to have a good plan. But he did still have that self-control to not just go in and start a fight right away.
I think what we see there is he's wise, but he's wise because he's always ready to learn. I think that's something we didn't even write down, was like a spirit of learning, like a readiness to like jump into new experiences and not dive into them, but kind of step into them and see what lesson is to be learned. And that's what we are seeing here. He's this wise old warrior, but he's still slowing down, assessing the situation, like using really strong, in a sense, battle tactics to approach coming home. Because another part of this is he went to Hades, and while he was there, he was visiting with Agamemnon. And you got to think, Odysseus wouldn't have known that Agamemnon was killed by basically a collaboration with his wife and this other guy. Mm-hmm. So he kind of gets that piece of knowledge right there. And he's like, ooh, how can I apply that when I come home?
Right.
Like,
is my wife
kind of going to be conspiring against me? So he kind of gets all these little lessons and he's like, apply, or log that into my memory bank. And so we see him not only being told by Athena, but also him bringing his experience to the table.
Yeah. And this was all to be a test. It was for him to be self-controlled, but he was going to test. So he tests the swineherd first. Is this a man that has been faithful to my family and to me as I've been gone? And he turns out to have been faithful. Yeah.
Pass the test.
Yeah. And then he goes on and he's going to test the suitors to see, okay, are they really as bad as I think that they are? And I'm going to give them a chance to see how they treat a vagabond. And that's where our other kind of idea, an attribute comes in, is kindness.
Yeah.
And these suitors were not kind to this poor man.
They were unkind to Telemachus. They were unkind to him, this poor man.
Yeah. And I think, obviously the Odyssey, Homer's work is it's prehistoric. And so, is it prehistoric? Yeah, I mean, it'd be considered prehistoric, right?
I don't know. I always used to think dinosaurs. When
I know. That's why. Maybe not prehistoric.
It's definitely pre the life of Christ. So it would be old, before the Roman Empire.
For sure.
I just
don't know if it would be considered
Yeah, where's the timeline?
Ancient. It's just ancient.
Ancient
So
literature.
Ancient.
All right, we'll keep rolling.
Okay, so kindness. So Homer, his work is ancient.
Yeah.
And then we look at our current stories that are being told today, or even Grimm's fairy tales that have now been taken into Disney movies.
Yeah.
And we see this idea of like a witch or a beautiful princess or a fairy or a goddess come in and pretend to be a witch.
Or like just an old vagabond old lady with warts and stuff.
Testing a prince or someone, and is that person kind to them or not? And then they turn back into their beautiful self, and
they cackle and
they cast curse.
Their wand, and then
right.
He's
so
a frog.
Homer had this idea kind of first in the sense of, okay, how are these suitors going to treat a vagabond who's actually turning into this great warrior that's going to take them all out?
Yes.
And the suitors did not pass the test.
No, not at all.
So Ben and I really think about with ourselves, how do we treat those that come into our life that we might perceive as less than us or really has a need, and are we being kind to them? Because we never know when we are going to be in the presence of an angel or whatnot. And so how are we serving others that are less than us? And it will come back to test us one day in some way or another. And so I think that was a huge lesson that even Homer was teaching.
Yeah, and I struggle with that one because I'm like, in our society today, we see just being really transparent, all over the country, there's rising homelessness. And how do you know if somebody's, homeless because, they have struggles with mental illness, or they're just trying to like game the homeless system? You have all these ideas going through your head when you pull up to a stoplight or a stop sign, there's somebody there holding a sign. And so you get all these layers of confusion of how do you show your kindness. And I think really what we boils down to is if you're faced with somebody, show kindness. Like default to kindness. And that's something I personally am really working on, because I don't always default to kindness.
I really enjoyed reading about Penelope's side, and this really came in at the end of the story, really seeing her characteristics and who she was as a queen of Ithaca in a sense, as a woman, as a mother, as a wife. And she was incredibly faithful.
Yes, everybody's like, he's dead. Give up, girl.
Yeah, and she would say it sometimes, but her actions were faithfulness, and she was just not going to give in to one of these suitors who were not treating her well. I mean, the actual acts should have been a suitor stays at home and sends gifts to the woman that he is trying to win. Well, these suitors weren't giving gifts. And then on top of that, they're taking all of her husband's livelihood. They're feasting. They're just acting like complete slobs in her home. And she was not going to take a husband, even though she had been essentially widowed. I mean, she didn't know if Odysseus was alive or not for 20 years. She's raising her son by herself, and she's incredibly diligent in that. She raised a very faithful and hardworking son that was different than the other teenagers or young men of the town.
He wasn't even like these
Telemachus was
guys
completely different.
All.
Yeah.
It was like, to me, it's like some war general who, we've looked up to over time in history, like him dying, and then the wife going to a frat party and trying to find a husband. That's what it felt like.
Sure, yeah.
And so
except the frat party came to her.
The frat party came to her, but it was so cool to see Telemachus, which showed, think about this, Odysseus was gone. And so what you're getting at is Penelope raised this boy who became a man with great discipline, great honor.
Right, because he respected his mom. The suitors were telling Telemachus, tell your mother to marry one of us or kick her out of the house or something. And he said, no, I will not. If she decides that she wants to marry one of you, that will be her decision and she can leave at that point. I am not going to kick my mom out of my castle. And so Telemachus really reflected on his mother's approach towards him. It wasn't specified, and Telemachus even calls the swineherd father during the story.
Because he had a father figure when his dad was gone, so to speak.
But it was very evident that Penelope did a good job with Telemachus. And
For sure.
I love back to the faithfulness to her husband, Agamemnon, who is dead in Hades, finds out that Odysseus returns and Penelope was faithful. And he just talks about her faithfulness and what a woman she is all the way from Hades. And it's just really cool that her reputation rang.
Her reputation precedes her, as it were.
all throughout the world in the underworld.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. I loved learning about that. So she was very faithful, very diligent to raise her son.
Yeah, and
an amazing
also,
woman.
I think this is something to say, is he was gone for a decade, and she clearly maintained the property, the estate. Like, she stepped in when, in that time, it was not really a woman's role to, like, run the estate. You know, it would have been more like, the man runs the estate, the woman runs the household and does the sewing, and like that's kind of like what we're seeing. Like, she's always at the wheel and stuff. Yeah. But she oversaw the estate, and it stayed flourishing and thriving. And I just thought how cool, how much diligence she had in that. It just said a lot about her.
She was still running the house in some way. And then I love even when she finally gets to the point where she says, "Okay, I'm going to choose a suitor." And she goes and gets Odysseus's bow and says, "Okay, whoever can string this and win these, they were games essentially. Yeah. Whoever can do that, I will be his wife." And I think just her knowledge, her wit, knowing that they wouldn't be able to, that her husband was a hell of a man.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
She was not going to have to go home with one of these men.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, when Odysseus finally reveals himself, she still questions. She still uses her wisdom, her discretion, and doesn't just run into his arms. Yeah, she says, "Okay, let me test this and make sure." So
let me ask you something only we would know here. Like, there was a level of belief, but also a level of positive hesitation to build the necessary trust of truth.
Yeah, and so as a woman, I read about her and just these different attributes, and I thought, okay, these are things that I want in my life, and I'm learning from her life.
So the last characteristic is honor, and we see honor throughout the entire book in so many of the characters. We see honor in Odysseus, we see honor in Telemachus, we see honor in the swineherd and the oxherd. You know, these guys who their master essentially was gone for a decade. He was essentially dead as far as they knew, and they're still like saying, "These suitors are taking advantage of my master's property." They still considered him their master, even though he was, for all they know, dead. And you think Telemachus was still like overseeing the property for the sake of his father. And so it's just so cool to see how honor was really built on legacy more than built on preference or desire just of self. It was built throughout the generations. And so for me, thinking about that more and more, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do each day to not only honor my father, but honor the legacy that I will pass down to my children? What am I doing that removes self from the situation? What steps can I take? Do I need to go buy that cool new thing? Or do I need to go and actually research some ways where the legacy I pass down can be far more than just something that I enjoy in my life?
Reflecting I want to say on your something. Life, are you being honorable?
See, the thing is, though, I feel like honor needs a cornerstone. I feel like honor needs something to fasten itself to.
In today, our society, I don't think that we necessarily talk about honor a lot because, like you were saying, it is kind of something that could feel elusive. What is honor? Am I doing something honorable in this act? Or it's not really talked about. And so I think, as people, we should have an anchor so that all of these attributes, self-control, kindness, diligence, patience, and faithfulness, and honor, we have something that we say, this is what I believe in, and this is what I'm acting out of. And so I am honorable based off of this.
Based off of this standard.
Yeah, this standard. So that anchor is a standard, right?
Yes.
And we have our own. What is your thought on that? Where is your idea of honor or self-control, faithfulness, these attributes that we've talked about out of the Odyssey? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? We really want to know because it is something that it can be so elusive in our society today.
Especially in our culture right now.
And we really want to kind of be able to define it more so that we can act on it and have these attributes because, like we said in the beginning, I want to be a person that is known for faithfulness and self-control and kindness and honor. And so we have to have a standard point of where that's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole point of this, is the great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Coming together, having the conversation, having the discussion, and coming out with a better standard of life and a better way to interact and engage with society.
So that we have a better relationship, so that we have better relationships with our parents and our siblings and our children and our coworkers.
Yes.
And friends and just people that we interact with.
Absolutely.
And how we are coming across to them.
Yeah. We could think we are presenting ourselves in a certain way, but unless we have a conversation about that, hey, how did this make you feel? Hey, how do you feel about this idea? Rather than just like, for me, I'm a hammer. I'm like, this is the way it is. This is how I want to talk about it. I don't care. But I need to have more conversation so I know how my actions or my words are making somebody feel when I engage with them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's the entire point of this, is opening up those conversations.
Yeah. So that was a lot of information, big takeaways from the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Really taught us a lot. And I hope that you are getting as much out of it as you're reading it. I really hope that this conversation kind of helped you break some of that down and kind of see things maybe from a different viewpoint than your initial viewpoint was. And we'd love to see your viewpoint as well in the comments.
We want to hear what you guys are saying. Drop us a comment below, please, because we don't know what other people going through the great books with us are coming up with, are thinking through, and are changing or evaluating thoughts. That's how we should get strengthened through this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We'll see you next time, guys.
Bye now.
Bye.